When you pull out your smartphone and you tap open a map application and just wait for that screen to populate,
Yeah.
there is this incredible, like almost subconscious expectation of absolute precision.
Oh, for sure.
I mean, it feels like magic, but we basically treat it like plumbing. You see that little glowing blue dot, and the app just simply says, "You are here."
And it's an incredibly comforting piece of feedback, It's a binary, localized truth. You are either standing on this street corner or you are on that street corner.
Yeah.
There is no ambiguity.
No, none at all. We just inherently trust that the whole chaotic physical world has been perfectly translated into this sterile digital space.
Yeah.
You just don't question the grid.
Right.
Like whether you are checking a weather radar to see if a storm cell is going to hit your house in 10 minutes, or you're about to board a commercial airliner that relies on autopilot.
Or even if you just, want to find the nearest drive-through coffee shop.
Exactly. You assume the map is an objective reality.
But then when you step back and look at the structural reality of what it actually takes to generate that little blue dot on your screen,
which is a lot.
It's massive. You start to examine the mechanics of mapping a physical planet that is constantly shifting, covered in oceans, plagued by volatile weather, and, frequently contested by hostile governments.
Yeah, suddenly that sense of effortless precision completely vanishes.
Completely. You realize you're looking at a system that is literally the definition of a logistical and mathematical miracle.
And unpacking that mathematical miracle is our mission today. Welcome to this custom-tailored deep dive.
We have a lot of ground to cover, literally.
We really do. We have a massive stack of sources for this one. Historical reviews, technical data, unclassified intelligence reports, declassified operational histories.
It's a goldmine.
It is. And we are going to map the evolution of an agency most people have probably never even heard of, the National Geospatial-Intelligence Agency, or the NGA.
We're looking at the whole discipline of geospatial intelligence, or GEOINT.
Which is just a remarkable evolution to trace. Because this isn't a dry academic history of people drawing lines on paper.
No, not at all. It is a fundamental story of how humanity learned to conceptualize, measure, and then ultimately dominate physical space.
And the core tension here is so fascinating to me. We're talking about taking mapping from a static piece of paper, like a folded chart sitting on a general's desk, to a dynamic, four-dimensional predictive model.
Right, an architecture that can track non-state actors moving through crowded cities.
Or monitor global climate degradation in real time.
Or guide stealth helicopters through highly defended, hostile airspace.
Exactly. But to understand how that happened, we actually have to go back to the origin of two very distinct, very competitive professional tribes.
Yeah, the historical lineage of this agency is really defined by intense friction.
Oh, yeah.
For a very long time, mapping the world and taking photographs of the world operated as these parallel, almost entirely isolated military functions.
Separate worlds.
Completely separate worlds with totally different philosophies.
So I want to break those two worlds down, starting with the traditional map makers, the cartographic foundation.
Okay, yeah.
If we look at the earliest precursors of the modern NGA, they really emerged from the absolute necessity of mapping physical battlefields during the interwar period.
Right.
So in April 1939, the U.S. Army centralized its map production. They took the War Department map collection and handed it over to a newly consolidated group.
The Engineer Reproduction Plant. The ERP.
Right, the ERP.
And, that organizational structure made perfect sense for the technology of that era.
How so?
Well, if you wanted to map an area back then, you sent a surveyor with a tripod and a transit out into a literal field to physically measure angles and distances.
Very hands-on.
Extremely. But then World War II happened, and the entire paradigm of warfare fundamentally changed.
Right, because suddenly you have long-range aviation and overhead reconnaissance.
Exactly, which meant you could no longer rely on traditional ground-based surveying.
You can't exactly send a guy with a surveyor's tripod in the middle of an active hostile battlefield in Europe or the Pacific.
No, the moment they step out, they're compromised. They'd be shot.
So the military had to adapt. And ground-based surveying gave way to photogrammetry, photo interpretation, and geodesy.
Which is essentially the science of measuring the Earth from above.
Right. So to manage this massive technological shift, the ERP was consolidated into the Army Map Service, the AMS, in May 1942.
And this organization just became a massive, centralized cartographic engine.
Huge.
Their entire mandate was compiling highly detailed topographic maps from aerial photographs, specifically focusing on areas of the world where the United States had absolutely zero physical ground access.
Which eventually evolved into the U.S. Army Topographic Command in 1968.
Right, before eventually rolling into the Defense Mapping Agency in 1972.
But the Army wasn't the only player hoarding geodetic data, right?
No, not at all. Concurrently, you had the U.S. Air Force establishing its own specialized charting division,
which evolved into the Aeronautical Chart and Information Center, or AC.
located in St. Louis, Missouri.
Yeah, and their mandate was totally different from the Army's, because the Army cared about the ground.
And the Air Force cared about the sky.
Exactly. I mean, a tank commander needs to know exactly where every trench, tree line, and river crossing is located.
Right, but an Air Force bomber pilot does not care about a tree line.
Not at all.
They are tasked with navigating the upper atmosphere, so they need high-resolution charts for flight planning, magnetic variations, and, precision bombing campaigns across the entire continent.
It was just an entirely different type of cartography.
Completely.
So that establishes the traditional mapping side. But while the military branches are churning out these topographic and aeronautical charts, a completely different discipline is being born in the intelligence sector.
Right, because the Cold War brings about high-altitude reconnaissance flights, like the U-2 spy plane.
And those early satellite photography missions.
Yeah, so suddenly there is a desperate need for a specialized field dedicated solely to imagery analysis.
Which leads us directly to January 1961. President Dwight D. Eisenhower authorizes the creation of the National Photographic Interpretation Center, NPIC.
Right, NPOC. This was a joint venture between the CIA and the Defense Intelligence Agency, and it was housed within the CIA's Directorate of Science and Technology.
And looking at the sources, they proved their worth almost immediately on the global stage.
Oh, absolutely. NPIC analysts became incredibly famous during the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis.
Right, they were the individuals sitting in those rooms looking at overhead reconnaissance film from U-2 flights and identifying the Soviet medium-range ballistic missile sites under construction in Cuba.
They basically provided the hard, empirical, undeniable evidence that President John F. Kennedy used to justify his diplomatic and naval blockade.
It was a massive win. But what the sources highlight, though, is the deep, almost tribal cultural rivalry that developed between these two disciplines.
Oh, the friction was real. On one side, you have the traditional cartographers and geodesists.
And on the other side, you have the intelligence imagery analysts.
Right.
I'm looking at these sources, and the map makers seem to view the imagery analysts as almost reckless.
Yeah, and honestly, it makes sense if you think about it from their perspective.
How so?
Well, if your entire job as a cartographer is to establish a permanent grid of the world measuring mountains and oceans, a blurry black and white photograph of a tank that is going to move 10 minutes later feels entirely useless.
Right. It comes down to fundamentally different philosophies of time and space.
Exactly. Cartography is an exercise in establishing eternal geographic truths.
A mountain's not going to move tomorrow.
No. A river might slowly shift over a century, but for all intents and purposes, it is permanent. So mapmakers viewed imagery analysts as short-sighted, like they were just chasing fleeting, transient targets.
Like playing a tactical game of whack-a-mole, rather than building a foundational understanding of the environment.
Right. But then the imagery analysts must have looked at the map makers and thought they were moving in slow motion.
Yeah, totally.
They viewed the cartographic process as agonizingly slow and just completely obsolete for modern combat.
If you are an imagery analyst tracking a Soviet missile convoy, you need to know where that convoy is right now.
Exactly. If you have to wait 6 months for a cartographer to beautifully illustrate a topographic map and run it through a printing press,
the battlefield has already changed. The war is over by the time the map actually arrives.
Right. And the government clearly recognized this administrative nightmare.
They had to.
So, acting on a classified presidential directive from late 1971, the Department of Defense establishes the Defense Mapping Agency, the DMA, on January 1st, 1972.
And they just scooped everybody up. They take the Army's mapping divisions, the DIA's geodetic departments, the Navy's hydrographic center, the Air Force's aerospace center, and they absorb them all.
Yeah, they take thousands of civilian and military personnel spread across Bethesda, Northern Virginia, and St. Louis, and just jam them under one administrative roof.
But as we know, an administrative roof doesn't magically dissolve decades of cultural friction.
No, putting people in the same building doesn't mean they actually integrate their workflows.
The operational separation between the map and the image, persisted.
The map makers stayed in their lane making maps, and the photo analysts stayed in their lane looking at photos.
And that stubborn separation lasted all the way until the 1990 to 1991 Gulf War.
Yeah, that conflict finally exposed the fatal flaw in keeping the map and the photograph separated.
Operations Desert Shield and Desert Storm basically brought the entire crisis to a head.
The military experienced severe imagery and mapping shortfalls.
Right. You had U.S. and coalition forces operating deep in the Kuwaiti and Iraqi deserts, but the maps they were physically holding in their hands were largely based on obsolete colonial-era British data.
Which is just crazy.
Okay, let me try to put this into perspective for you. Imagine trying to navigate a high-speed car chase through a complex modern city.
Okay.
You have a live feed from a traffic helicopter showing you exactly where the suspect is right this second.
Right.
But the only reference you have in your hand to figure out which streets connect and where the dead ends are is a folded paper map printed in the 1920s.
Wow.
It's a recipe for utter disaster.
That is an incredibly accurate analogy for what ground commanders were facing over there.
Really?
Yeah, they were maneuvering fast-moving, mechanized forces like tanks, armored personnel carriers in active, highly volatile combat zones.
With real-time satellite feeds.
Yes, they had real-time, highly detailed satellite feeds showing Iraqi Republican Guard positions. But they had to somehow mentally correlate that dynamic, top-down digital imagery with static, outdated topographic paper charts.
The physical map and the active intelligence were just completely out of sync.
Completely. And it's terrifying to think about the friction that causes in a life-or-death situation.
So this operational crisis forces another massive bureaucratic reckoning.
Right. In 1996, Director of Central Intelligence John Deutsch champions the creation of a truly unified agency.
And on October 1st, 1996, we get NIMA, the National Imagery and Mapping Agency.
They completely absorbed the DMA, the Central Imagery Office, the NPIC, and all the imagery exploitation elements of the DIA and the National Reconnaissance Office.
But again, institutional friction rears its head. Just because you change the acronym on the front door doesn't mean the people inside suddenly agree on how to do their jobs.
Yeah, the sources highlight this amazing, almost comical detail about a NERA inspection.
The National Archives and Records Administration.
Right. They found out that after NEMA was stood up in 1996, the agency just inexplicably stopped regularly transferring permanently valuable hard copy map products to the National Archives.
Which was a direct violation of federal record schedules.
Exactly. But it perfectly illustrates the clash in record-keeping cultures.
How so?
Well, you had traditional military map makers who historically documented and meticulously archived every single paper chart for posterity.
Right.
Suddenly, they are merged with civilian intelligence analysts whose entire professional ethos is focused on the immediate operational use of digital imagery to solve a problem today.
Right. They didn't care about archiving a map for historians 50 years from now.
Not at all. So the administrative gears just ground to a halt.
So how do they finally bridge this cultural chasm?
Enter retired Air Force Lieutenant General James R. Clapper, Jr.
Okay.
He becomes NEMA's third director in September 2001, and he realizes that to resolve this division, he has to literally invent a new discipline.
Right. He coined the term Geospatial-Intelligence, or GEOINT.
And the architecture of that specific phrase is highly conceptual but profoundly important.
Because he didn't just smash the two words together in a sentence.
No, he used a hyphen. Geospatial intelligence.
The immense bureaucratic power of a hyphen.
It's true. It functioned as a deliberate linguistic bridge. The institutional adoption of that hyphen signaled to everyone in the agency that geography and intelligence were no longer sequential, isolated steps.
You don't make a map on Monday and then ask the intelligence guys to draw targets on it on Tuesday.
Exactly. They were now an inseparable, unified capability. The geographic data is the intelligence.
Wow. And that conceptual shift leads to the final evolution. On November 24, 2003, NEMA officially becomes the National Geospatial-Intelligence Agency, the NGA.
And the scale of this organization today is just staggering.
Yeah, we're looking at roughly 14,500 civilian, military, and contractor personnel.
They operate out of a massive consolidated facility called Campus East in Springfield, Virginia.
Plus, they maintain a huge presence in Missouri with the next NGA West campus in St. Louis.
Which was specifically built to expand unclassified research and partnerships.
And they are physically deployed to over 100 U.S. military installations and 20 international command posts.
They are essentially the quiet giant of the U.S. intelligence community.
Okay, so this obsession with creating a unified capability is fascinating, But it brings up a mechanical question.
Right.
Before the NGA can track a terrorist network or monitor a fragile ceasefire agreement, they have to build the literal grid that this intelligence sits on.
Right.
We have to look at the mathematical foundation beneath our feet and the stars above us.
Yeah. Any sophisticated analysis requires a reliable canvas. You need a mathematically perfect understanding of the Earth itself before you can overlay any behavioral data.
And this brings us to a concept the NGA calls foundation GEOINT.
Yes. The sources define foundation GEOINT as a massive, entirely unclassified layer of geospatial data.
Unclassified.
Entirely. It describes the physical, gravitational, and cultural characteristics of the Earth, spanning from the planet's core all the way up into the space domain.
It is the geodetic bedrock.
Exactly. This foundation is required to ensure that all other forms of military and civilian intelligence can be accurately geolocated.
So think of it this way. If the underlying math of foundation GEOINT is off by even a fraction of a percent,
every smart bomb misses its target.
every commercial cargo ship runs aground on a reef.
And every smartphone navigation app sends you driving into a lake.
Not ideal.
No.
And the absolute centerpiece of foundation GEOINT is something called WGS-84, the World Geodetic System 1984.
WGS-84 is essentially the master reference frame for the entire planet. The NGA serves as the primary author and custodian of this mathematically precise model.
So what does it actually do?
It defines the Earth's exact size, its shape, its varying gravitational pull, and its complex geomagnetic models.
Which is funny because I always just assumed the Earth was a perfect sphere. But it's not, is it? It's kind of a lumpy potato.
Right, exactly. The Earth is an oblate spheroid, meaning it bulges at the equator and is slightly flattened at the poles. Furthermore, gravity is not uniform.
Wait.
Yeah. The gravitational pull you experience standing over a dense tectonic plate is slightly different than standing over a deep ocean trench.
Oh, wow.
So WGS-84 accounts for all of those microscopic physical variations to create a uniform mathematical grid.
And the scale of its application touches almost every aspect of modern life. I mean, it provides the universal coordinate system utilized by all U.S. military weapons systems.
It guides the entire global commercial shipping industry.
And going back to our intro, WGS-84 is the invisible mathematical architecture generating that blue dot on your consumer smartphone map.
But the reality is that the Earth is not a static object.
Right.
It wobbles on its axis. Its tectonic plates constantly shift and grind against each other. So to maintain the pinpoint accuracy of WGS-84, the NGA operates a global network of 11 GPS monitoring stations.
Just 11 stations constantly listening to the sky to keep the grid intact.
Yep. They collect real-time global navigation satellite system, or GNSS, data.
So they are continuously monitoring the exact orbit trajectories of the satellites.
Tracking tiny geodetic drifts as the Earth's crust moves and identifying any signal anomalies.
And this data is critical. The Air Force GPS Command and Control relies directly on this NGA monitoring data.
Without it, the atomic clocks on the satellites would drift out of sync with the receivers on the ground.
This is what the sources refer to as providing the foundation for assured position, navigation, timing, and targeting. Assured PNTNT.
Because if the timing is off by a millisecond, the positional data on the ground is off by miles.
Wow.
Precisely. The military's entire encrypted communications network, the financial sector's high-frequency trading algorithms, and your local power grid all rely on that incredibly precise GPS timing signal to synchronize their systems.
So if WGS-84 breaks, modern infrastructure effectively collapses.
Essentially, yes.
I want to push back on this idea of a perfect grid, though.
Okay, sure.
Because if WGS-84 maps the magnetic models of the Earth, and we know that the Earth's magnetic poles are constantly shifting. I mean, the North Pole is literally wandering toward Russia as we speak.
It is.
How on earth do they keep magnetic compasses accurate? If the physical reality of the planet's core is changing beneath the digital grid, doesn't the navigation system break?
It's a great question, and that wandering magnetic pole is a massive critical vulnerability.
Right.
Because magnetic compass navigation is still a vital, unhackable backup for military aircraft and civilian transits if electronic systems fail.
So how do they fix it?
To solve this, the NGA launched the MagQuest initiative. They are utilizing commercial CubeSats, these tiny, relatively inexpensive miniature satellite constellations.
Basically strapping highly sensitive magnetometers to satellites the size of a shoebox.
Exactly. These CubeSats continuously measure and update the world magnetic model. They monitor the shifting geomagnetic poles in real time from orbit.
Oh, that's brilliant.
Yeah, this ensures that when a ship's captain looks at a physical magnetic compass in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, the NGA has already calculated the exact declination, so the compass heading remains flawlessly accurate to true north.
It's just an astonishing level of physical custodianship over the planet.
It really is.
But maintaining the mathematical grid is only half the battle. Let's look at the actual data they populate that grid with. The sources note that it is a statutory mission of the NGA to prepare, publish, and maintain global databases for aeronautical and maritime safety.
Right. Their mandate is basically to prevent catastrophic operational failures. Whether you are flying a plane or steering a submarine, you absolutely need to know what is in front of you.
And the raw numbers from the sources regarding the sheer volume of data required to do that are almost impossible to visualize.
Give us the numbers.
The NGA maintains 1.8 billion active aeronautical data entries.
A billion with a B.
Yes.
This is the data that powers global flight planning, automated navigation, and cockpit flight management systems.
Right.
Like every time a commercial airliner routes across the Atlantic Ocean, the autopilot is riding along a digital highway paved by that database.
They also track 49,000 individual airfields in the automated air facilities file.
Meaning they're standardizing runway dimensions, precise coordinate data for approach vectors, and local communication frequencies for every usable airstrip on the planet.
From massive international hubs to remote dirt strips in hostile territory. Exactly. But this next number is the one that really got me. They maintain a database of 24.5 million vertical obstructions.
Yeah, that one is intense. These are man-made and natural physical features.
Why do they need to know that?
Well, imagine you are a tactical military pilot flying a low-altitude terrain-following mission at night.
Okay.
Or you are a civilian medical evacuation helicopter pilot navigating through a dense, foggy city to reach a hospital roof.
You absolutely need terrain avoidance data.
You need to know exactly where every single unlit radio tower, newly constructed high-rise building, and sheer granite rock face is located.
Right, because if a single new cell phone tower isn't logged in that database of 24.5 million obstructions,
A helicopter could hit it.
that's terrifying. But despite all this heavy digital integration, the NGA hasn't entirely abandoned the analog world.
No, they haven't.
The sources mention they still actively manage and print 3,900 standard physical nautical hard copy charts.
Which I know might seem antiquated, but it is a deliberate strategic failsafe.
Because of hacking.
Right. In any modern near-peer conflict, electronic jamming, GPS spoofing, and cyber attacks on navigational systems are going to be the primary threat.
So those 3,900 physical paper publications serve as the unhackable baseline for naval vessels.
Exactly. If a destroyer's digital systems go completely blind in the South China Sea, the Navy can pull out a paper chart and a sextant and still navigate effectively.
It's strangely comforting to know the paper map isn't entirely dead.
Yeah.
But, I mean, the NGA can't possibly map the entire planet, catalog every radio tower, and track every shifting sandbar completely alone.
No, the scale is too massive. So to maintain this global coverage, they rely heavily on the Multinational Geospatial Co-Production Program, the MGCP.
And what is that exactly?
The MGCP is a fascinating example of international burden sharing in the intelligence community. It is a consortium of allied nations that agree to share the immense labor of mapping critical, high-interest regions of the globe.
According to the sources, through this program, they have successfully mapped more than 25% of the Earth's landmass.
Right. This collaborative approach allows the United States to acquire 7 times more topographic coverage than it could ever possibly compile through unilateral efforts.
That's a huge return on investment.
It is, and they don't just share labor. Historically, they also used targeted venture funding to force technological leaps.
Yeah, through InQtel, which is the intelligence community's nonprofit venture capital arm.
Right. In the early 2000s, NEMA provided about 25% of the seed funding for a small, innovative company called Keyhole, Inc.
And Keyhole was developing pioneering 3D Earth viewing software.
Exactly. They figured out how to stitch satellite imagery together so a user could smoothly zoom from a global view down to a neighborhood street.
Which sounds very familiar.
Because they were subsequently acquired by Google, and that exact technology formed the underlying foundation for Google Earth.
Wow. It's a perfect example of how military-grade spatial visualization was successfully translated into a consumer product.
It fundamentally changed how the public interacts with geography. I mean, before Google Earth, Average citizens didn't have access to interactive, high-resolution satellite imagery of their own homes.
True. But long before Google Earth, long before artificial intelligence, and long before modern satellite constellations were constantly mapping every inch of the planet, the NGA's predecessor organizations were tasked with mapping something entirely different.
The moon.
Yes, the moon.
The Lunar Mapping Program is just one of the most incredible, painstaking scientific endeavors of the 20th century.
It really is.
It was entirely driven by the necessity to support human spaceflight, and the methodology they used was incredibly analog.
The sources outline a truly amazing story here. In late 1961, the Air Force ACI-1 set up a dedicated observatory program at the Lowell Observatory in Flagstaff, Arizona.
Right.
They were given access to the massive Clark Refractor Telescope to visually inspect potential landing sites for the Apollo missions.
But the problem they faced was basically optical physics.
Because of the atmosphere.
Yes. If you try to take a photograph of the moon through a telescope from Earth, the image has to pass through the Earth's atmosphere.
Which is turbulent.
Right, it ripples and distorts the light. A photograph will capture all of that atmospheric blurring, making it impossible to measure the exact depth of a lunar crater.
So they couldn't just snap a picture.
No, they had to rely on human interpretation to filter out the distortion.
And that's where they employed highly skilled scientific illustrators. The sources specifically highlight a woman named Patricia Bridges.
Yes, Patricia Bridges.
She would spend her nights in the freezing observatory dome, observing the lunar terrain directly through the telescope eyepiece.
She would wait for moments of perfect atmospheric clarity.
Just staring through the lens.
Yeah. She observed the subtle play of light and shadow creeping across the craters as the sun angle changed. And then she would physically turn away from the telescope and translate those visual observations into highly detailed, hand-painted, shaded relief maps.
Wait, hand-painting the topography of the moon?
Literally hand-painting. She used an airbrush to perfectly capture the gradations of shadow, creating a three-dimensional illusion of the terrain.
And her airbrushed lunar charts provided the critical topographic detail that NASA used to confidently select the relatively flat plains of the Sea of Tranquility for the Apollo 11 landing site.
It's wild. But the lunar mapping mission became significantly more complex as the Apollo program advanced.
Right.
For the later scientific missions, Apollo 15, 16, and 17, NASA didn't just need a flat place to land. They needed highly accurate, mathematically contoured topographic maps to plan the astronauts' extravehicular scientific traverses in the lunar rovers.
Because they needed to know exactly how steep the rim of the Hadley Rill was so the rover wouldn't tip over.
Precisely. So these later missions carried an advanced panoramic camera system built by iTech Optical System.
And it produced these massive, wide-angle, 110-degree photographic negatives of the lunar surface from orbit.
But there was a massive physical problem with those negatives.
What was it?
Because of the spacecraft's high-speed orbital motion, combined with the extremely wide sweep of the camera lens, the panoramic images suffered from severe scale distortion and a curved horizon.
Right, because you cannot draw a flat, highly accurate grid map from a heavily distorted, curved image.
Exactly. A crater at the edge of the negative would look artificially stretched compared to a crater in the center.
So the Apollo Orbital Science Photographic Team, chaired by a man named Frederick Doyle, had to invent a mechanical solution to uncurve the images.
Right. They built something called the Apollo Transforming Printer.
What a name.
It was an absolute marvel of optical engineering. It was basically a specialized remapping device.
How did it work?
It essentially ran the original curved film negatives through a highly complex, precisely calibrated system of lenses and moving mirrors.
So by physically manipulating the light as it passed through the negative and onto new film, the printer literally bent the geometry of the image back into a flat plane, completely removing the distortions.
Which then allowed the DMA Topographic Center to compile highly accurate, contoured orthomaps of the lunar surface.
That's incredible.
And what is so profound about this is that this early, entirely analog workflow, using glass lenses and mirrors to physically stretch a photograph, laid the direct mathematical foundation for the digital orthorectification techniques that modern software algorithms use to map the Earth today.
Establishing this perfect mathematical grid of the Earth and the Moon, whether through an airbrush, a complex mirror system, or 11 global GPS stations, is an incredible scientific feat.
Oh, without a doubt.
But it forces a larger question. How is this sterile, perfect mathematical grid actually deployed when human lives, Fragile peace treaties and global geopolitics were on the line.
That is the ultimate test of GeoINT, because the goal isn't just to produce a perfect map.
Right.
The goal is to use that map to alter human behavior, force geopolitical outcomes, and resolve conflicts.
And this obsession with a perfect grid isn't just an academic exercise.
Right.
Because when that grid is flawed, diplomacy fails.
Look at what happened in November 1995 during the Dayton Peace Accords, which were attempting to end the horrific violence of the Bosnian War.
Right. The core issue of the negotiations was strictly territorial. To achieve peace, the negotiators had to split the territory between the warring factions exactly 51-49.
Right. So under the direction of Ambassador Richard Holbrooke and Lieutenant General Wesley Clark, the Defense Mapping Agency shipped over 100,000 printed paper maps to the negotiation site at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio.
100,000 flat paper maps.
Yeah. But they quickly realized that paper maps were totally insufficient for the task at hand.
Why?
Because they were trying to draw incredibly precise border lines over rugged, complex Balkan valleys and mountains.
Ah, I see.
A line drawn on a flat paper map with a thick marker could accidentally place a vital water source, a key town, or a highly strategic military corridor in hostile territory.
So the leaders would look at a flat map and just argue over who controlled a specific hill.
Exactly. So to break this diplomatic gridlock, the DMA cartographers deployed a revolutionary, highly classified system called PowerScene.
PowerScene, what was that?
It was an early three-dimensional terrain visualization system. The cartographers took high-resolution satellite imagery, overlaid it with scanned maps, and draped all of that over precise digital elevation models of the Balkan terrain.
And it allowed the negotiators to perform virtual fly-throughs of the disputed borders using a joystick, almost like a flight simulator.
Yeah, and if we connect this back to the evolution we've been discussing, this was the exact moment when digital geospatial modeling stopped being just a navigational tool and became a primary psychological weapon of diplomacy.
The sources outline three massive impacts this technology had on the peace process. First, it completely eliminated the concept of territorial bluffing.
Right. Before PowerScene, a seasoned negotiator could sit at a table and deliberately misrepresent the physical reality of the terrain.
They could claim a mountain pass was impassable or a river was wider than it was, just to gain a strategic advantage.
But with the system running, the cartographers could instantly fly the camera down to that exact mountain pass and display accurate elevation, slope, and intervisibility calculations on a screen.
You couldn't lie about the terrain anymore because the objective truth of the terrain was right there in the room.
Exactly. Second, it allowed for real-time dynamic recomputations.
Because as the rival leaders debated moving a borderline a mile to the east to include a specific village, the PowerScene system continuously recalculated the total land percentages on the fly,
instantly verifying that every single compromise still adhered strictly to that mandated 51-49 ratio.
And third, and this is perhaps the most crucial psychological element, was the technological intimidation factor.
Yeah.
The sources note that these fly-throughs show the Balkan leaders, specifically Serbian President Slobodan Milosevic, the exact high-resolution 3D imagery that U.S. combat pilots used for mission rehearsal.
It delivered a profound psychological shock. Milosevic realized in that exact moment that the United States military possessed absolutely precise, three-dimensional targeting data for every single bridge, road network, and hidden military bunker in the entire region. The system established absolute geometric consistency from the negotiation table all the way down to the GPS-guided field boundaries. It just made further resistance seem technologically futile.
So that is how you use cartography as a diplomatic weapon to end a war.
Right.
But the NGA is fundamentally a combat support agency. Their grid is also used for direct kinetic action. Let's look at Operation Neptune Spear, the May 2011 raid that neutralized Osama bin Laden.
Yeah, the NGA's contribution to that operation was arguably the most critical foundational intelligence of the entire mission.
So the target was a specific compound in Abbottabad, Pakistan, known locally as the Waziristan Haveli.
Right.
It was a large upper-class home on a roughly 3,500 square meter plot of land, but it was heavily fortified and incredibly isolated. We're talking up to 5.5 meter concrete walls topped with barbed wire, a 2.13 meter privacy wall constructed on the third-floor balcony to block line of sight from the street.
And absolutely no telephone or internet connections running into the house.
It was an intelligence black hole from a signals perspective.
You couldn't tap a phone line that didn't exist. So, under the direction of NGA Director Letitia Long, the agency deployed classified satellite and drone assets to establish continuous, persistent overhead surveillance of the compound.
They mapped the physical layout of the walls and outbuildings with centimeter-level accuracy.
But they weren't just staring at the concrete. They were tracking the residents' daily movements over months to identify the target's pattern of life.
Like, when do they walk in the courtyard? Who took out the trash?
And crucially, the NGA went beyond the visual spectrum. Analysts mapped the unseen electromagnetic spectrum in the surrounding Bilaltown neighborhood.
To find the radar.
Exactly. They identified the exact locations and frequencies of the local Pakistani military radar signatures. By mapping the invisible radar waves, they were able to plot a highly specific flight corridor.
A physical blind spot in the coverage.
Which allowed the incoming MH-60 Black Hawk stealth helicopters to slip through and completely avoid detection by the Pakistani Air Defense Network.
But the most stunning detail from the declassified sources regarding this operation is the Abbottabad Compound 1 model.
Yes. NGA modelers constructed a perfectly precise, physical, three-dimensional replica of the compound.
They took all that digital GEOINT and built a physical tabletop model.
Yeah.
This model was brought directly to the White House to brief President Barack Obama and his senior national security officials in the weeks before they authorized the raid.
And it was also heavily utilized by DVGRU SEAL Team 6 to rehearse the operation at a mock-up facility.
So the SEALs used the NGA's spatial data to plan their exact landing zones, their breaching points to the concrete walls, their internal room clearing routes, and their contingency casualty evacuation procedures.
Which explains why the collateral damage in what was a highly congested residential suburb was kept to an absolute minimum.
They were prepared.
The operators already knew the exact geometry of the compound, the height of the steps, and the angles of the doorways before their boots ever hit the ground in Pakistan.
The precision of the bin Laden raid is just a hallmark of modern GeoINT. It makes the agency's methods look infallible.
It does.
But it is vital to understand that this incredible operational success was actually born directly from the ashes of one of the intelligence community's most disastrous analytical failures.
Because institutional evolution is almost always driven by catastrophic failure.
And the intelligence community experienced a massive systemic failure regarding Iraq's weapons of mass destruction prior to the 2003 invasion.
The sources dive really deep into this breakdown. The National Intelligence Estimate erroneously assessed that Saddam Hussein possessed active biological and chemical weapons programs.
Right.
And what's fascinating is dissecting exactly why highly trained analysts were so fundamentally wrong.
Because it wasn't just a matter of having blurry satellite photos.
No, it was a profound failure of analytical logic.
Right. Analysts fell prey to highly sophisticated Iraqi denial and deception tactics. They suffered from a massive systemic confirmation bias.
Yeah.
Let's walk through this closed-loop logic trap because it's a terrifying look at how smart people can convince themselves of something that isn't true.
Okay, so the analysts started with a hardened assumption. Saddam Hussein has WMDs, and he is hiding them.
Okay.
Once you accept that premise as an absolute truth, it completely warps how you view the geography.
If an analyst looked at a satellite image of a suspected chemical weapons warehouse in Iraq, and there were no chemical weapons visible outside, no specialized transport trucks, and no protective gear being worn by the guards, a rational observer might say, well, there's no evidence of weapons here.
But the analysts didn't interpret the lack of evidence as proof that the weapons had been destroyed.
What did they think?
They interpreted the lack of evidence as absolute proof that Iraq was just incredibly efficient at hiding them.
Oh.
The burden of proof was entirely inverted.
So any evidence you find confirms your theory. And any evidence you don't find also confirms your theory, because it merely proves the efficacy of the enemy's concealment strategy.
Exactly. You literally cannot be proven wrong in that mental framework. It is a classic analytical death spiral.
So how did the NGA fix this massive cognitive blind spot after the reality of the failure became clear?
Well, it forced a massive institutional reckoning across the entire intelligence community.
They had to change everything.
Right. The NGA had to implement rigorous mandatory red team exercises and institutionalize alternative competing hypotheses in their daily workflows.
Meaning you don't just look for geographic evidence that supports your theory. You must actively try to destroy your own theory.
Exactly. You assign a separate team of analysts to look at the exact same satellite imagery and argue the opposite conclusion.
And these exact, rigorous, adversarial alternative analyses were later successfully applied to the Abbottabad compound assessment.
Right. They constantly challenge themselves. What if the guy pacing in the courtyard isn't bin Laden? What else could this data mean?
It ensured they didn't fall into the same confirmation bias trap twice.
Exactly.
So this analytical reckoning, combined with the shift away from traditional state-on-state warfare during Operations Enduring Freedom and Iraqi Freedom, caused another massive evolution in how the NGA operates.
Yeah, they had to stop looking at static buildings and start looking for transient, non-state actors who were constantly moving.
Which led to the formalization of activity-based intelligence, or ABI. David Gauthier, who was a director at the NGA, formally coined and defined the term in 2013 to describe this new methodology.
And the core philosophy of ABI is wild.
How so?
Well, traditional intelligence waits for a crime to happen, takes a satellite photo of the crater, and tries to figure out who did it. ABI focuses on collecting massive streams of spatial temporal data where things are and when they are there. You identify patterns of life, track transient transactions, and geolocate fleeting targets before they can disappear into the civilian population.
It is highly target-centric.
A perfect early example of this approach happened in Iraq, supporting the Joint Special Operations Command's Task Force 714 in their campaign against al-Qaeda in Iraq.
NGA analysts integrated their high-altitude satellite imagery with real-time, full-motion tactical video feeds from MQ-1 Predator drones.
And those drones were being physically flown by pilots sitting at Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada, over 7,000 miles away from the target.
They relentlessly tracked insurgent couriers, mapping their communication lines, their meeting spots, and their supply routes.
Right. And this methodology eventually culminated in the December 2003 capture of Saddam Hussein himself, who was found hiding in a subterranean spider hole in Adar.
They didn't find him by looking for a bunker. They found him by tracking the geographic movements of the people bringing him food and messages.
Yeah.
Think about it like this. Instead of waiting for a suspect to rob a bank and then dusting for fingerprints, ABI is like tracking a suspect's credit card swipes, their easy pass highway tolls, and their smartphone's Wi-Fi pings simultaneously.
You watch their pattern of life intersect with known criminal networks until their daily routine betrays their location before they even act.
You map the behavior, not just the terrain.
You are mapping human activity as a dynamic, shifting geographic layer.
But this intense, persistent surveillance capability used to be a monopoly held entirely by wealthy governments.
Because launching a satellite was incredibly expensive.
Right. But what happens when anyone with a credit card can suddenly log online and buy their own high-resolution satellite imagery?
And this brings us to the democratization of space, which is fundamentally reshaping the entire landscape of global security.
The rapid proliferation of cheap commercial satellites, open-source data, and unclassified sensors has completely dissolved the historic government monopoly on overhead surveillance.
And rather than fighting this shift or trying to classify everything, the NGA has actively embraced it.
How so?
They created an initiative called the Tearline Project to help manage the overwhelming data deluge.
Right, because there is simply too much commercial remote sensing data being generated every day for the agency to process internally.
Exactly. So the Tearline Project formally partners the NGA with academic institutions, think tanks, and nonprofit organizations.
Together, they produce unclassified, open-source geospatial reports on critical national security issues that the public can actually read.
And Tearline has had some incredible successes. The sources highlight several major wins where open-source analysts uncovered state secrets.
Like what?
For example, Tearline researchers investigated a notorious political prison camp in North Korea.
Right, the North Korean government had explicitly and publicly claimed to have closed this specific camp.
But Tearline analysts combine high-resolution commercial imagery of the site with physical interviews from former detainees who had actually escaped.
By matching the detainees' descriptions of the guard towers and agricultural fields with the commercial satellite imagery, they proved the camp was not only still operational, but actively expanding.
They also tracked the procurement and deployment of Russian-made aircraft in Myanmar.
Tearline documented how the military junta was upgrading Yak-130 and Mi-35 aircraft.
Right, they tracked the specific structural modifications being made to these platforms to enable low-light, nighttime tactical airstrikes against civilian and insurgent regions.
They also exposed Russia's clandestine Arctic liquefied natural gas, or LNG, infrastructure.
Yes. By analyzing commercial imagery, they documented the massive construction of the Yamal and Arctic LNG-2 facilities, proving how Russia was building deep-water ports to bypass global energy sanctions.
But my absolute favorite example from a technical standpoint involves catching maritime smugglers in the Taedong River in North Korea.
Oh, that's a good one.
And the way they did it is fascinating because they used something called synthetic aperture radar, or SAR data.
SAR is an incredible technology because traditional optical satellites, like a regular camera in space, are useless if there are thick clouds or if it is the middle of the night.
You can't take a picture in the dark?
Exactly. But a synthetic aperture radar satellite actually beams its own microwave radar pulses down to the Earth and measures the reflection that bounces back.
Because microwave radar pulses pass right through clouds and weather systems, SAR can essentially see through heavy storms and absolute darkness.
Exactly. So Terraline analysts process this commercial SAR data through cloud-based Google Earth Engine environments.
And what did they find?
They were able to track large-scale, clandestine ship-to-ship transfers of illicit cargo occurring in the middle of the night, hidden beneath heavy cloud cover in highly information-denied North Korean waters.
The smugglers thought they were hidden by the weather, but the radar lit them up like Christmas trees.
Exactly.
This unclassified approach isn't just about catching smugglers, though. It has become a massive, potent tool for open-source diplomacy.
Right. In late 2016, the NGA managed a contractor-provided open-source program to actively monitor the fragile Syrian ceasefire brokered by the U.S. and Russia.
And the crucial detail in that operation is that they deliberately used only unclassified commercial imagery and public crowdsourced data. They didn't use a single classified asset.
Which is super important.
Why does that distinction matter so much in a diplomatic setting?
Because of the sources and methods problem.
Meaning?
If you walk into the United Nations and show the world a crystal clear photograph from a multi-billion-dollar classified spy satellite to prove Syria is moving artillery, your enemy suddenly knows exactly how powerful your classified satellite is.
You burn your spy capability.
Exactly. But if you use a commercial image you legally bought from a civilian company, you can share that verified proof with international partners and the media without exposing your classified asset.
You win the diplomatic argument while keeping your best cards hidden.
Right. And this commercial integration has completely revolutionized the modern battlefield, perhaps most vividly during the Russian invasion of Ukraine.
Absolutely. The NGA operates a program called Global Enhanced GEOINT Delivery, or GEGED.
Through this portal, the agency provides unclassified, map-ready commercial satellite imagery, primarily contracted from Maxar Technologies to hundreds of thousands of authorized users across the U.S. government and allied nations.
During the invasion, unclassified imagery from companies like Maxar, Planet Labs, and Black Sky was splashed across every evening news broadcast in the world.
It was used to expose the massive 40-mile-long Russian armored convoys stalled outside Kyiv, map incredibly complex Russian defensive trench networks, and instantly counter Kremlin disinformation campaigns about troop withdrawals.
The NGA even partnered directly with the State Department's Conflict Observatory.
Right, they use this continuous stream of commercial imagery to meticulously document and archive physical geographic evidence of Russian war crimes, such as the deliberate targeting of civilian infrastructure and hospitals in regions like the Donetsk Oblast.
But this deep reliance on commercial vendors raises a really important question about the shifting balance of geopolitical power.
Yeah.
What happens when a government decides it wants to stop sharing this data with an ally?
The sources highlight a highly revealing incident from March 2025. Due to ongoing domestic administrative pauses regarding military assistance packages, the NGA temporarily suspended Ukraine's direct access to the GEGD commercial imagery portal.
Historically, if the United States cut off your intelligence feed, your military went completely blind.
But because the National Reconnaissance Office did not enact formal shutter control...
Wait, what's shutter control?
Meaning they didn't invoke emergency legal powers to force the commercial companies to stop taking pictures over the war zone.
Okay, so since they didn't do that, the Ukrainian government simply bypassed the U.S. government bureaucracy entirely.
They realized they didn't need the NGA to act as a middleman. The Ukrainian government just took their own funding and bought the exact same unclassified satellite imagery directly from the commercial vendors.
It represents a massive geopolitical power shift. Governments can throttle official intelligence pipelines, but they can no longer entirely monopolize the sky.
Anyone with enough funding and an internet connection can buy near real-time overhead intelligence.
Which is precisely why the NGA the NRO, and U.S. Space Command recently signed the Commercial Space Protection Tri-Seal Strategic Framework.
Because these commercial satellite constellations have become so vital to daily military and diplomatic operations, they have essentially become primary targets for adversaries.
So this framework establishes formal protocols for the government to share classified threat intelligence with commercial vendors.
Right, to help defend those private networks from kinetic counterspace attacks and electronic jamming.
It's incredible to think about the government having to protect a private company's satellite because the military relies on it so heavily.
It's a totally new world.
But this unclassified view of the world isn't just used for foreign wars and tracking dictators. Some of the most critical missions of the NGA happen right here at home, looking down at our own soil during our absolute darkest hours.
Yes, while the agency is heavily focused on foreign intelligence, their mandate heavily encompasses domestic homeland security and disaster response.
And this civilian support mission truly solidified immediately following the terrorist attacks on September 11, 2001.
The sources show that immediately after the towers fell, NEMA partnered with the U.S. Geological Survey and NASA to directly support the chaotic recovery operations at Ground Zero in New York.
They deployed remote sensing aircraft equipped with an incredibly advanced sensor called a virus, the airborne visible and infrared imaging spectrometer.
They were flying military-grade spectral mapping technology directly over the smoking ruins of Lower Manhattan.
Let's explain what spectral mapping actually is, because it sounds like science fiction.
Okay.
Everything on Earth reflects light differently. A piece of steel reflects light differently than a piece of concrete or a specific chemical.
Right.
A virus measures the exact wavelength of that reflected light to identify the chemical composition of the ground below, and they use this at Ground Zero to provide two critical data sets.
First, they provided precise thermal hotspot mapping. The virus data identified deep, unseen subsurface fires burning deep within the collapsed rubble.
They mapped over 36 highly concentrated hotspots where the subterranean temperatures were exceeding 800 to 1300 degrees Fahrenheit.
Which was vital, life-saving intelligence for the fire crews and recovery teams navigating the pile.
Right. It allowed incident commanders to steer heavy excavation machinery and rescue workers away from unstable, highly combustible structural pockets that were on the verge of collapse.
Second, they mapped the invisible dispersion of deadly toxins. Analysts used the spectroscopic data to map the precise concentration and radial dispersion of pulverized construction materials floating in the air, specifically cruciatile asbestos.
By analyzing how the dust cloud reflected infrared light, they could map the airborne hazard in the surrounding atmosphere,
dictating exactly where responders needed heavy respiratory protection.
That domestic deployment proved that highly classified military intelligence assets could be instantly repurposed for civilian emergency triage.
And we saw that exact dynamic play out again during the 2010 Deepwater Horizon oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico.
During that massive environmental catastrophe, NGA personnel worked directly alongside the Coast Guard and the Environmental Protection Agency.
The sources specifically note NGA co-author Sylvia S. Shen and researcher Paul E. Lewis, who processed airborne multispectral infrared data collected by the EPA's specialized aspect aircraft.
They weren't just looking for where the oil was. They applied advanced thermal algorithms to the data to locate, characterize, and actually quantify the exact thickness of the surface oil slicks in real time.
By measuring the thermal signature, they could tell the difference between a thin sheen of oil and a massive, thick, crude slick.
This allowed the Coast Guard to stop guessing. They could direct their limited fleet of skimming vessels specifically to the heaviest concentrations of thick oil,
maximizing the cleanup effort before the slick could hit the fragile coastal marshes.
And then there's the response to Hurricane Harvey in 2017. This is a brilliant example of how you combine geography with human distress.
Yeah. The Coast Guard actually has a dedicated GEOINT unit embedded directly at NGA campus east in Virginia.
During the hurricane, the catastrophic flooding caused the emergency 911 dispatch networks in Houston, Texas, to become completely overloaded and eventually fail.
So the emergency calls were dynamically routed all the way to the Coast Guard's National Command Center in Washington, D.C.
But if you are a Coast Guard commander sitting in D.C. looking at a spreadsheet of thousands of desperate 911 calls from Houston, it is incredibly difficult to action those rescues.
You have a list of addresses, but the entire city is underwater. You need spatial context.
Exactly. So the embedded GEOINT team took the raw 911 call logs. To comply with strict domestic privacy and intelligence oversight regulations, they carefully stripped all personal identifiable information, or PII, from the data.
They removed the names and phone numbers, leaving only the geographic coordinates of the distress call.
And within 40 hours, they integrated those call locations with ongoing rescue logs to build highly accurate, real-time distress heat maps.
Which completely changed the rescue paradigm for the responders on the ground.
Ground commanders and helicopter crews could look at the heat map, cross-reference it with flood models to bypass completely submerged transit corridors, and deploy their limited rescue boats directly to the concentrated areas of greatest physical distress.
They let the data drive the rescue.
Beyond disaster response, the NGA also serves a vital, albeit quieter, role as a historical archivist.
Yes. To comply with federal executive orders regarding transparency, they manage a massive ISO 9000 certified records declassification program.
We're talking about 15.2 million pages of textual records reviewed for public release, achieving an 80% release rate.
And perhaps most significantly for the global scientific community, the NGA manages the public release of imagery from historical declassified satellite programs, specifically the Corona, Argon, and Lanyard surveillance missions from the 1960s and 70s.
But why do modern scientists care about grainy Cold War spy photos of the Soviet Union?
Because they provide an absolutely perfect high-resolution environmental baseline of the planet from 60 years ago.
Ah, I see.
Climate scientists, geologists, and archaeologists aggressively utilize these declassified images. They compare a 1965 Corona image of a glacier or a rainforest with a modern commercial satellite image to exactingly measure global terrain degradation, deforestation rates, and ice cap erosion over the last half-century.
It is a scientific goldmine that allows us to quantify climate change with photographic proof.
Exactly.
Finally, as a federal agency, the NGA has a strict, completely impartial duty to execute domestic executive orders regarding cartographic nomenclature. The map has to reflect the legal reality of the state.
Right.
The sources provide a highly specific example of this from January 2025. President Donald J. Trump issued an executive order titled Restoring Names That Honor American Greatness, which directed the renaming of several major geographic features.
And in strict compliance with that executive directive, the NGA simply updated its digital databases, navigational products, and maps overnight.
They just changed it.
Yeah. They officially reverted the labeling of the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America and changed Mount Denali back to Mount McKinley.
It illustrates exactly how dynamically responsive unclassified GEOINT is to domestic executive authority. The foundational grid adapts to reflect the current legal and political landscape.
Completely impartially.
We've gone from scientists hand-painting craters on the moon using telescopes, to cartographers using 3D fly-throughs to intimidate warlords, to analysts parsing thousands of 911 calls into life-saving heat maps. Where does the ultimate mapmaker go from here?
The institutional history of the NGA clearly proves that GEOINT has completely moved away from a static geographic pursuit. The future of the discipline is a highly dynamic, public-private hybrid architecture.
Right.
You still absolutely need highly classified, exquisite government satellite platforms to peer into foreign nuclear silos and map deep subsurface military installations. But commercial agility, open-source AI analysis, and unclassified shareability are what win modern diplomatic fights and counter global disinformation.
The discipline itself has fundamentally changed its core objective. The ultimate goal is no longer just drawing a mathematically perfect physical map of the mountains and oceans.
No, with the integration of computer vision and activity-based intelligence, it's about predicting human movements and identifying transient patterns of life.
The physical grid is already built.
Right. The future of GEOINT is understanding, tracking, and predicting everything that moves across that grid.
Which brings me to a final thought I want to leave you with. If activity-based intelligence relies entirely on tracking human patterns of life, and the sky is now absolutely flooded with commercial satellites and unclassified sensors, and all of that massive data flow is being constantly monitored and sorted by artificial intelligence, does the concept of hiding even exist anymore?
Wow. That is the ultimate, perhaps most unsettling question of the modern geospatial era.
Think about it. If every single geographic footprint you leave in the modern world, every digital toll you pay on the highway, every Wi-Fi network your phone pings as you walk down the street, every thermal shadow your car casts in a parking lot is just another interconnected data point on a massive digital grid. Are we moving into an era where stealth is no longer about physical concealment?
It really makes you wonder.
If you cannot hide from the sky, maybe the only way to disappear in the future is to figure out how to hide your data signature in plain sight. It's something to seriously mull over the next time you look at that comforting, perfectly precise little blue dot on your phone's map. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.